Last week, you had names like Jerry Jeudy, Brock Bowers, Jaden Daniels, and Bucky Irving go off in fantasy football, and they helped people win their matchups. Well, in today's video, I'm bringing you 10 players that will do the same in week 14 with a lot of your fantasy hopes on the line. Now, on last week's version of this video, we hit on 8 out of 9 players. The 10th player didn't play. That was Devonta Smith. So we're on a heater right now, and we're continuing that, all right? First player that's going to go nuclear this week, DeAndre Swift at the San Francisco 49ers. Even though it's an away game, I think he's going to have one hell of a day. San Francisco is a top 10 matchup for your fantasy running back in fantasy football. And if you look in recent matchups, right, against the 49ers, Rachaad White had over 19 points. Bucky Irving in the same game, 87 total yards, over 17 points. Josh Jacobs had a 3-touchdown game against them recently, over 28 fantasy points. And James Cook last week in the snow. Let James Cook, who was on this video series, by the way, all right, hopefully you started him, and 120 total yards, 19 fantasy points. And in the last 4 weeks in particular, the Niners are giving up the most points per game to the fantasy running back position. So DeAndre Swift, who is good in great matchups and bad in tough matchups, this is a great matchup to go out and chase. That Niners defense is banged up across the board. I'm predicting 18 plus touches, 90 plus all-purpose yards, and 15 plus PPR points. All right, our next player that's going to go off this week is Jacoby Meyers at the Tampa Bay Bucks. My wide receiver 22 in my rankings. Tampa Bay is the best matchup for your fantasy wide receiver right now. In the last couple weeks alone, Darnell Mooney had 86 yards, a touchdown, over 18 points. DeAndre Hopkins had his best day as a Chief, his best day this year, over 28 points, 2 touchdowns. Juwan Jennings had 93 receiving yards, over 16 fantasy points. And just last week, Adam Thielen had over almost 100 receiving yards, a touchdown, and almost 24 PPR points. If you guys remember that second touchdown, I don't know why that wasn't called a touchdown. His arm was definitely in, his elbow was in. It should have been 2 touchdowns. He should have had a 30-point day. Point is, if you got a wide receiver, it's a good shot that they can go off against this defense. I mean, on the season, the Bucs defense is top 5 in passing yards and total yards allowed per game, and they also are top 8 in total points allowed to opposing offenses. And here's the good news for the Raiders. All right, well, for fantasy purposes at least, they are the second biggest underdogs of the week, 7-point dogs on the road, which leads me to believe that they could be throwing the ball deep into the fourth quarter. There could be some sweet, tasty, garbage time fantasy points for Jacoby Meyers this week. I'm predicting 8 targets, 100 yards, and 18 plus PPR points. All right, so this takes me to my spicy, hot, bold take of the week. A man from the waiver wire straight into your lineup. In his first NFL start, Isaac Guerendo puts up 100 plus all-purpose yards in a down-to-the-wire win against the Chicago Bears, finishes with over 16 PPR points in his first ever start in the NFL. Again, he plays the Chicago Bears, who are kind of middle of the pack against running backs. To be honest, this is more about the offense that he's a part of. I mean, you could put me behind, that offensive line, and in that scheme that Shanahan has over there in San Francisco, I might be able to get you 15 points. That's a joke for legal reasons, but the Bears defense against running backs this year, Chuba Hubbard had over 17 points. James Conner had 15 without a touchdown. Josh Jacobs had almost 24 points. Aaron Jones recently, who I told you guys to start, I think that was 2 weeks ago now, had almost 20 points, 129 yards and a touchdown. The Bears defense this year is top 8 in rushing yards allowed per game and yards per carry allowed. They're almost giving up 5 yards per carry. You can beat this defense on the ground. And in his limited action, Isaac Guerendo has produced really, really well. Remember, in week 8 versus the Dallas Cowboys, he had over 19 fantasy points, averaged 6 yards per carry, got into the end zone, 85 yards. Again, it might be a hot take, but we're predicting over 100 yards and 16 plus PPR points. All right, the fourth player that's going to go off this week, that is Darnell Mooney at the Minnesota Vikings. Minnesota is the second best matchup for your fantasy wide receiver. Of course, you're going to start Drake London, but I'm telling you, with confidence, put Mooney into your lineups as well. The Vikings against wide receivers this year, Amon-Ra St. Brown over 25 points, Puka Nacua over 18, DJ Moore and Keenan Allen in the same game both had over 22 points, both got into the end zone. And then last week, remember, last week our hot take was starting Marvin Harrison Jr. with confidence, and we thought he would get into the end zone. He did, 17 PPR points. So you can beat this team through the air. They give up the 5th most passing yards per game, and you can't beat them on the ground. They give up the fewest rushing yards per game. So again, if you're going to try and beat this team, you're going to do it through the air. And this is Kirko Thuggins, Kirko change. This is his homecoming back to Minnesota. So surely they're going to let him fling the ball all over the field. I'm imagining a matchup in which both sides are scoring, the defenses are struggling. I think this could be a barn burner. This is the matchup that I'm the most excited about this week, both with, the Vikings offensive players and the Falcons offensive players. I think Kirk Cousins is going to be on his best behavior. I'm predicting 8 targets, 80 yards, and 17 plus PPR points for Darnell Money Mooney in that return for Kirko Thuggins. And the 5th player is my quarterback start of the week, and that is in the same matchup, but the opposite side of the ball. That is Sammy D, Sam Darnold versus the Falcons. All right, Atlanta is the 5th best matchup for your fantasy quarterback. And again, I just predicted that we're going to have a big barn burner here with the Vikings and Falcons, and this is the opposite side of that, right? You got to put up points on both sides for a barn burner. I think Sam Darnold is positioned very well to go off. In recent games against quarterbacks for the Falcons, right? Kyler Murray had over 21 points. Baker Mayfield, 340 yards, 3 touchdowns, almost 30 points. Derek Carr, that's right, Derek Carr, without Chris Olave, okay, by the way, without Rashid Shaheed, over 23 points. And Bo Nix put up 4 tuds, over 36 fantasy points against this defense. It's a really healthy over-under as well at 46.5 points. Again, opposite side of the Kirk Cousins homecoming. Vikings are tied this week for the 5th highest implied team point total at 26. That's almost 4 touchdowns worth of points that are being projected by Vegas. So we're a big fan of Sam Darnold this week. I'm predicting 300 plus total yards, 3 total touchdowns, and a top 6 quarterback finish. All right, my 6th and 7th players come from the same game. Tyrone Tracy and Malik Neighbors. Definitely excited about both of these names against the Saints this week. They are the 4th best matchup for your running back, and they're the 13th best matchup for your wide receiver, but hang in there with me because trends recently have shown that this is a good matchup. But let's start off with Tyrone Tracy. All right, first off, I was a little bit worried last week after the fumble issues if he was going to, his role might be, declining at all, but it wasn't. He came out last week, was a completely dominant guy in snap share, and now he faces the Saints, who recently, Bucky Irving had over 18 points, over 5 yards per carry. Sean Tucker in that same game had almost 10 yards per carry, over 34 points. Javonte Williams had his best day in years against this team, over 6 yards per carry, 2 touchdowns, 26 fantasy points. Chuba Hubbard had 2 tuds, over 21 points. Bijan Robinson had 2 tuds, over 29 points. If you're a running back, you definitely want to face the New Orleans Saints. Now, for the wide receiver part of this, for Malik Neighbors, Drake London recently had 17 points. Jerry Jeudy had over 26 points. In the same game, Elijah Moore had over 18. And just recently, last week, Puka Nacua had over 17 points. Fantasy points per game allowed in the last 4 weeks to wide receivers. Let's have a look at this. The Saints are giving up the most points to wide receivers in the last 4 weeks on a per game basis. So again, while they're middle of the pack technically, recent trends have showed us that you want to target this matchup for your wide receiver and your running back. This defense is top 7 in yards per rush allowed, in rushing yards allowed per game, in passing yards allowed per game, and in total yards allowed per game. There's no Marshawn Lattimore that's going to worry you when it comes to Malik Neighbors. And ultimately, I think the offense is going to funnel through those 2 names and those 2 names alone. Tyrone, I'm predicting 20 touches, 100 plus all-purpose yards, and 16 plus PPR points. For Malik Neighbors, he's going to see at least 12 targets, 80 yards, and 17 plus PPR points. All right, that takes me to my 8th player on the week. Speaking of revenge games, speaking of comeback games, the homecoming, if you will, Calvin Ridley versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. Jaguars. All right, people make fun of me if I say Jaguars. I don't care, guys. I don't care. All right, the Jags. All right, in recent weeks, the Jags, who are the 4th best matchup for your wide receiver. Devonta Smith had over 18 points and a tud. Amon-Ra had over 160 yards and 2 tuds, 38 fantasy points. Just recently, Nico Collins had over 115 receiving yards, almost 20 fantasy points. The Jags defense is top 3 in total yards and total points allowed per game. The only team in the NFL giving up over 400 offensive yards per game to the other, offense. It's crazy. And again, we've got the revenge game here for Calvin Ridley. Well, is it a revenge game? I mean, technically, he chose to leave the Jags. They offered him a contract. So is it really a revenge game? I don't know. He'll have extra motivation to go out there and go off against his former team. 7 catches, 80 yards, and 15 plus PPR points is what we're predicting. All right, the 9th player. is Jonnu Smith versus the Jets. This has nothing to do with the matchup because technically this is the worst matchup. Well, it's one of the worst matchups you can have for your tight end. But I don't care, all right? It has nothing to do with the matchup. The Jets defense does not worry me. It has everything to do with the fact that Jonnu Smith has been Timothy for fantasy football this year. Guys, from week 7 onwards, he's been the team's #1 target share in Miami, over 20% target share in 5 out of 7 games, and a 23% target share in that span from week 7 onwards. That's a huge chunk of games. We're talking 7 games, guys. Again, over a 23% target share on a team that has Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Devon Achane. He doesn't care. He says, I'm that guy. Put the team on my back, dude. I will carry you. All right, in that span, by the way, from week 7 onwards, he is the tight end 1 overall in scoring, and he is the tight end 2 in points per game. He's averaging more points per game from week 7 onwards than David Njoku, George Kittle, Travis Kelce, K. Dotton, Mark Andrews, and Sam Laporta. And the Dolphins are tied for the 5th highest implied team point total with 26 points, right there with the Vikings and the Bucks. And I'm predicting at least 8 targets, 70 yards, and 15 plus PPR points. I mean, the guy's on a heater. You can't sit him. I don't care if the matchup's bad. He's got to be in your lineups. And the 10th player who we had on the video last week, all right, we told you to start this guy with confidence last week. It worked out. Bucky Irving versus the Raiders. We're going to tell you to do it again this week. Vegas is a middle-of-the-pack matchup, all right? So technically, you know, not as good as the Panthers, but I just don't care. There's so many reasons to start Bucky Irving. I mean, recently, Raiders defense against running backs, Najee Harris had his best game, 7.6 yards per carry, over 20 points. Kyron Williams had 2 tuds. Chase Brown had over 26 fantasy points. Devon Achane had over 20 fantasy points. So you can definitely score big points against this defense. The Bucks, here's the big deal for this call. The Bucks are 7-point favorites. They are the second biggest favorites on the week, so they should be able to establish the run deep into the second half. And the Bucks are tied for the 5th highest implied team point total, like we said earlier, with the Vikings and those other teams. So everything is set up for Bucky Irving to have another huge game, and he's dominating opportunities now. It's great to see. I'm predicting 18 plus touches, 100 plus all-purpose yards, and 17 plus PPR fantasy points. I appreciate y'all for watching the video. English is hard. Do me a favor, hit that like button to show some love. Subscribe if you like the content. And if you have a tough start sit question this week, or you want to ask me a fantasy question, check out the pinned comment where you can access me at any time on our website. And if you don't have a free account on Flock Fantasy yet, while you're over there, go ahead and sign up to one for free with our promo code LAND, L-A-N-D. When you sign up with our promo code LAND, you're going to get the expert consensus rankings, the trade calculator, and the My Team Analyzer all for free. I appreciate you watching the video. The bus video will be back out tomorrow, and good luck this week. I'll see y'all soon. Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, L-A-N-D, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.